We're good to go.
Okay, we are live this morning, and we're this is Senate Transportation Committee, and we are continuing our discussion. We've got some changes, transportation program, facility changes, and we're talking about amendments. We all have copies of the Caledonia State Airport. Is that correct? We all have our copies of it. And so who is with us this morning on the screen? Can you hear us this morning? Hello?
Yeah, sorry. Justin Smith, I'm the municipal administrator for the town of Linden, Village of Lindenville.
Hey,
Christian Thompson, Chair of the Linden Select Board.
okay, good. We can, like I said, we'll have a little discussion. You can jump in anytime you wish. And so who would like to, Anthea, are you taking us through this? Or?
This is identical to the language you saw last Friday. The only difference is it's now a standalone amendment to be authored by one or all of you, as it was written as an instance of amendment last Friday. But there have been no changes made since then. The only thing I would be able to update you on is the House Transportation was talking about this upstairs for the last hour, and I think they're going to want to make some changes.
So they've already seen a copy of what they're doing.
Yeah, they were hoping to do it after you had finalized your discussions on it, but when you had a long floor and the caucus of the whole yesterday, the timing just didn't work out. But the things that they were talking about is putting in a right of first refusal, having the authorization be time limited to try and.
Well, we raised that question, whether there should be a limit on it.
Yeah, so those are the two main things that they've been kicking around upstairs. And then the debate that you have been having in this committee as to the pros and cons of a lease versus a sale versus a very, very long.
You know, in a short period of time, we're going to talk about this for over a week. And it's so positive. I mean, there's a lot of good feelings out there, and no one feels that we're cramming something down. It's very good. It's an issue that I think that gained a lot of support locally, and we haven't heard anything negative about it. But I'm sure the wording, there'll be some wording changes or amendments or whatever.
May I ask
Sure.
Senator Ingalls, the language for the sale of the building, Department of Health, the building in Burlington, was that a time limit authorization?
That was, they were gonna have 3 months to make, what we're gonna do was do the appraisal on the building, offer it to them for that appraised value, and then give them 90
So
days.
there's a buyer then.
90 days, well, they were gonna offer it to the city. So, because the city had expressed interest in it, a lot kind of like what we have here. Nobody's come forth with.
But if the city doesn't want it, is there a time limit for BGS?
On that point in time, because at that point in time with that building, the state has determined that they're going to sell it regardless. So the only time limit that's on that is with the first right of refusal with the city, but there's no time limit on it.
And what they're talking about upstairs is not a time limit on a particular buyer having a right of first refusal, but the state having, and they were sort of talking about 18 months to find a buyer and start the process of entering into an agreement not finalized before the.
The reason I'm asking is alignment with other sale. And
Right.
it sounds like then for the purchase or for the sale, if the city says we're not buying it, then they have the authorization to put the building up for sale. And there's no time limit in the capital bill on the authorization that BGS has to negotiate the sale.
Right, and I think, yes, and I think the two main differences here is that that building is definitely gonna be sold, if it can be sold for the price that they could be happy with. And this one right here, we're here because we have somebody that's expressed interest in it. And so, and I don't know what the state's position is on if the people, or if within this time limit that we're negotiating maybe with this one company, are they looking to keep it for sale for any length of time? I don't know what that position is.
The fact is, we're doing an RFP so that if there are other interested buyers, then they can come forward.
Right.
So in this case, it was like the city being right at first refusal. I was just trying to
Right.
align.
To say that a different way, I just think that with the building, it's definitely something that wants to be sold. It's going to be sold as long as it can happen. And on this airport, I think the only reason we're here is because somebody has expressed interest in buying it. Before we could negotiate with them in good faith, the state would have to have the right to sell the property. And I don't know what the state's intention is after that, if we can't come to an agreement with a group, what the state's timeline is, or what their expectation is to keep on marketing it until they find a buyer. I don't know that.
So I guess the question is, do we want to put a limit on the authorization to sell? I think you're suggesting that and the other point, the building in Burlington, there's a lot of the cost there, right?
Right.
But the same thing is true here. We have, what was the estimate, 10, 12 million? 14 million of a deferred maintenance.
Justin, good morning, thank you. Any questions that you had, that you looked at the final? We certainly want to have input, any suggestions you might have. I know you've been very involved in this, and we want to make sure we keep an open communication with you folks. So,
Sure. Many of the things that you folks are currently talking about are the things that we've been hearing from the different meetings that have been held here. I believe that the buzz phrase that I have heard repeatedly is cautiously optimistic. I think the people here, from pilots to adjoining landowners, they are in favor of it. They're cautious about this opportunity, but I think they're excited about it for the most part. The town would like, and I think Christian is going to speak to it, ask for a couple of, I think, fairly small concessions as far as we would like an opportunity to comment on the RFP. We're not asking to be, have a seat at the table certainly, but just review it. And if there's something that's unique to our community that we don't think is being addressed, just make a suggestion or two. But overall, I think the general tenor of this region is that we're cautiously optimistic about this project and would like to see the RFP process, sale process move forward and see where we go.
The amendment that we have before us does have the agency shall consult with the town of Linden on any request for proposals related to the purchase or lease. I was just wondering, is that the language you support, or you feel that it needs to be somehow modified in some way? I just was wanting to make sure that what we have here is that you've seen, and whether you have changes that you would recommend.
Sure, Chris is going to speak to that.
Oh, okay.
Thanks again for allowing us to have some input here. We appreciate it. And all the people in town that I've spoken with have been surprised and pleased that you're making such an effort to allow the residents of Linden to really share their voices on this, because there are some passionate opinions.
So I'm going to be successful if we all work together, because it was new to us, but just a week ago. We want to make sure that you folks are aware of what's going on, because if we're going to do this, we want to make sure we get cooperation from everyone. So I appreciate the fact that you're getting involved in this and making sure that every question is answered.
Well, thanks. I mean, I know it's people's first reaction usually when something gets sprung on them with a short timeline is to kind of dig their heels in, but on this there does seem to be quite a bit of optimism in town that this can be successful long term. So I wanted to ask what the committee sees as the town's role in the statement in the amendment regarding the RFP. At what stages does that language, the current language, allow the town to participate? Would we get to review and comment on the RFP before it goes out? Would we be able to see every proposal that comes in from possible buyers? I would just like some clarity there. If you would, I'd appreciate that.
Okay, well, if there's a question, either anybody in the room would like to respond to that question or comment? Yes, Michelle?
Michelle Boomhauer, Vermont Agency of Transportation. Our interpretation of the language as is stated in the amendment currently is that we would sit down with the town to discuss the RFP before it is issued on the street for responses. We have not contemplated a situation where the responding proposals, which would probably include proprietary financial information, would be would be part of a review process outside of the agency.
Okay,
So if I can, the tenor that I heard at the meeting at the airport on Monday was that there's value not only in what you get from a sale, but also the value you get from the entity that purchases it and how they are as far as a community-oriented organization or business. And I think that was one thing, although we were kind of skirting around the entity we all know has expressed the interest, but there was a lot of discussion regarding the value in having a business or a private enterprise that owns this facility being a community-oriented business. So I think there are values that go beyond just cost, and I think that was expressed fairly consistently throughout the meeting with the hangar owners and the general public that was present the other night. So I think to build on Chris's comment, I think that would be the town's concern, is that there is value in who you end up with as your partner in this. And I think we would want to be reassured that we're getting someone that does have the community's interest in mind.
Good point, Senator Chittenden.
So Michelle, if I may, is it unheard of? Is it common practice to involve a non-V-Trans employee as a key stakeholder as part of the trusted group that would be reviewing the RFPs with assurances that the information is not publicly available? Have you ever brought in a stakeholder not outside of V-Trans?
I can't say that we've never brought in a stakeholder. From the outside, I would say it's more of an unusual process. And I think maybe what would be satisfactory would be to build, and folks from the town can let us know, to build into the RFP process some sort of vetting that would occur relative to what a respondent to the RFP would have to do in terms of meeting with the select board, hosting a public meeting to talk about their visions and plans, so that we could then sort of use that public engagement process, which would be part of the RFP requirements, to get feedback from the broader community as well as town leadership on the merits in terms of what values the response to the proposal from a particular entity is bringing to the table, that could be part of the scored elements.
Yes.
And I think the reason why this is working so well, why we've had the broad support, is because the state's gone into it, not only offering to build that into to let the town be secure in the decision, but it's been the state's position that you're looking for a good purchaser to do all of what the town's asking. And I think that's why it's working so well. The state didn't come to us and say, we just want to sell the airport. The state came to us because they thought that they found possibly a good partner to come into, not only to purchase the airport, but to better the community, to make it better, to make a situation even better. So I think that's why it's working so well, is that the open dialogue, everybody's on the same page, that we're just not trying to sell an asset, like Senator Kitchell asked about selling a building in Burlington. We're actually looking to build a better asset, to build a better area, to build a better community, and with input from all the stakeholders. So I think that's why it's working well.
Well, I think.
Justin, you had a question, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Chris did, sorry. My name's on the thing, but it's Christian Thompson, Select Board.
Okay, I'm sorry. No.
No, it's okay.
Yeah, I was wondering, does the committee, so you're, from what I'm hearing, I'm getting the idea that not necessarily the highest bid would be awarded the property, but perhaps there could be a way to include what is the best fit for the community and the facility itself. Am I hearing you correctly?
Yeah.
Michelle?
Well, they have to meet the statute requires
Right.
a bid, but once that condition's been met, it's not uncommon to have other criteria, right?
So I can say from the perspective of the language, nothing in here says it needs to be sold to the highest bidder. It does say it needs to be fair market value, that's under subsection B, and then those conditions under subsection C need to be met. I also do not think anything in the language, and Michelle touched on this, requires that the town be consulted for purposes of what comes in response to the RFPs. But it sounds like, I think there are two ways you could modify the language to sort of solidify the work that the agency would do with the town at the outset. One would be, and this is at the end of line 11, adding in prior to the issuance of any RFP, so making it clear that the consultation needs to happen before the RFP is issued. Or you could go a little further and instead of doing prior to the issuance of any RFP, say, and the town shall be given an opportunity to comment on any RFPs prior to issuance. And that could be reflected in the scoring criteria and what is necessary as part of the submittal. So I think those are two drafting ways to address the timing of when the consultation will happen. I also think you heard a lot from the agency about what their plan is, and if you trust the agency, then perhaps you don't need to be as prescriptive.
Yes.
It might be good just to make clear that it's prior to the RFP being released, but I think with the agency on record here saying what they want to do about listening to the town and public engagement, that is sufficient for me. I don't think we need to have more language there. The only other thing that I would just think about that the town might want to do is also be consulted before the final agreement is written. So they're looking at the RFP and they say, oh, we really want to have this in there about a town meeting, but then the agency either forgets or decides, oh, we don't want to do that, and then they just sign it and the town won't have any recourse. So maybe just not having them review all the RFP proposals that come in, but look at the final lease agreement before it's signed and just give the town one last opportunity to weigh in and say, oh, I thought we were gonna, plant flowers out front.
So
Or a more important issue.
from a drafting perspective, I think you could add something in at the end of subsection D that says the agency shall not proceed with the sale or lease unless fair market value and the town of Linden is given an opportunity to review the purchase and sale or lease agreement.
Fair rest.
I like that idea. I really do. I just think it's worked so well because the communication's been open between everybody. And I guess I'd ask the town. I'd ask you gentlemen, if that is language that works for you guys.
I know that we can commit, if we were given an opportunity to comment, I know we can commit to having a very quick turnaround on that, to not hold up this process in any way. But just because we really have the pulse of the community, no offense, but better than you do.
Yep.
We feel like we may just see something in the RFP that we would like to at least submit a comment on. Not having an assurance that it would be included or a change would be made, but just so that we can, reassure people in our community that, we did look at it and we provided comments in the best interest of the residents of Linden, and that you at least considered our comments.
It is our hope, as we all know, we have other airports, that this will set up kind of a future of anybody else in the future wants to do anything with other airports, which we all hope to, someday do more business in the area. So we want to make sure we get this as right as possible.
Russ wants to sell the international one up in Coventry.
Yes.
I know somebody that wants to sell Burlington Airport.
One of the things though, because it's, what we have here is a state-owned asset. It is owned by the citizens of this state. And so, to us, we have a fiduciary obligation here that is related to the fact that this is state property. My question around this gets back to this open-ended, if we want to have an open-ended authorization, or whether we would want to have a period of 3 years or something, and then come back and relook and see what the benefit of this experience has been. If it's, obviously, if there's been successful negotiation and the buyer and all the conditions are met, that's great. But at the end of 3 years, if nothing has happened, might want to have that as an opportunity to check back or some period of time.
Well, I agree with that. I don't want to get ahead of the, you guys, but I know that in real estate, and I'm not proposing a timeline like what we abide by in real estate, but we can only have an agreement a year's length of time. So I agree with you, Senator Kitchell, that there should be at some point in time where we come back and revisit this, but I don't think a year's long enough. I didn't say that, but I don't know what the time frame is, other than the fact that I would be not, I think that it should be a longer period of time than that.
3 years, and obviously the agency can come back, we'd have a better sense of how this has progressed.
Have it come up while we're in session so we can deal with it if we need to.
Right. Would you want it to be an outright repeal of the authority, or would you want it to be a repeal of the authority if there isn't like a negotiation?
Well, I suppose you could sunset the authorization and then it would come back to be renewed or just allowed to sunset.
So 7/1/26.
Well, when we're in
No, well, if
session.
it's in
Well, I
July,
gotta-
we're not in session.
I wanna hear-
Hopefully you would know.
I wanna hear from
in
Michelle.
advance of that. So you could do it in the 26th legislative.
Well, I just thought if we could do it in January, we could do it in the DA or something like that, you know.
So you don't think you would want to do it in January? I think you would want to do it, if you're going to rely on possibly using the BAA as the vehicle to extend the sunset, you're probably going to want to do it in like April.
Why?
Because the BAA usually is not signed until April.
So you want to do it before then?
I think you would want to give the General Assembly the opportunity to extend the sunset before it repeals, before it sunsets. And if you pick like January 1, you won't be here. And if you pick January 15th, I think that's
Yeah,
just a little bit
I hear you.
optimistic in terms of getting something.
Yeah.
Michelle, comment?
So
I think this would be acceptable language. I think, we're gonna, I would imagine we would have a clearer picture of the viability of this effort in a shorter duration than what you're providing us. And I expect that we will be updating you if we haven't completed a sale by this time next year, next session. So I don't see any reason why this sunset language would be a problem.
I didn't hinder you in any way.
I don't think so.
No,
no.
3 years is reason, a
That's a
year is
long
way
time.
too short.
Yeah, I think it is too.
Do we have any idea what the house is ready for bullet? If they're thinking about this like we are?
Yeah, I think what Anthea characterized at the beginning related to the fact that the right of first refusal was, I think, an important element for them. They appreciated the language that would keep this as a operating public use
So
airport,
who would have the right of first
the
refusal?
state.
Post, like if a buyer eventually, like 20 years down the line, sells that right of first refusal,
Okay.
not a city of Burlington
Okay,
upfront
all right, I just wanted to be clear, we weren't talking.
No,
about-
it's different, very different.
I didn't think the town of Linden wanted to be the right of first refusal. All right,
So then, the sort of ongoing public use element was very important to them. there were a few members that expressed concerns about the outright sale of this type of public property versus a 99-year lease. And I think the agency on that point would continue to want to be able to have either option, but it would be placed in the RFP as it could go one way or the other depending on the buyer's preference. We wouldn't want that to be the sticking point in terms of executing a sale.
So what about a right of first refusal? I mean, now that we're making modifications anyway. Well, well, I guess, yeah.
My fundamental concern with sale is I feel 50 years from now or 100 years from now, the state of Vermont is going to they might look back at us and why did they sell an airport? I mean, if you go back to 100 years ago, did anybody know that the automobile age was going to come about? And I'm just concerned with letting go of this asset that our future generations are going to scold us for doing so. That's why I like a 99-year lease where it allows Beta to do it, or whoever it is, to do whatever they want to that property. But that is the ultimate right of first refusal. Whereas if we do lease it to them at any time, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years from now, then we could easily sell it at a different rate. But
Those are the same arguments for the Burlington office building.
Well,
Well, I mean, the question really becomes one of protecting the state's ability to be the buyer if 20 years from now that appears to be in the public interest, and is, I would think, essential to our transportation infrastructure. Right now, that doesn't seem to be very likely, but we don't know. And first of all, as it is, it's an underperforming asset. And the deferred maintenance is only going to go greater. It's 14 million now, but it's not a priority, nor would I think any of us would make it a priority out of our transportation, out of all the competing needs for transportation money. So, there's no, it's sort of a belts and suspenders, maybe protection to have the state have that ability, but does the agency have a position?
Related to the right of first refusal.
Yeah.
Yeah, we feel that the right of first refusal is a reasonable, and we wouldn't see that as hindrance to any sales negotiation.
and I see it as this, the difference between selling a building in the center of the city. Well, you can always go build another building, but you don't always have a chance to acquire back an asset as valuable as what this airport could be. The thing I'm most proudest about is that even though when we're looking at rail lines and we're looking at airports in the broad of the transportation budgets that we do, we are recognizing that it's a greater good to keep those assets viable and keep them going. So to concur with Senator Chittenden, I do believe that 100 years from now, looking back at it, if we did have a chance to require that asset back, that we would be looking as pretty smart thinkers to have put that in there to for the state of Vermont. I just believe that.
You want to report back to Senator Ingalls 100 years from now?
Well, they can, but they better be wanting to talk to a stone.
it'd be a big monument.
Anything from the town in this discussion? We're trying to be open as we can.
I don't have anything to add to that.
No, other than I think if the state has the right for first refusal, it may make it more unlikely that if the purchaser either goes out of business or abandons the property, that it wouldn't sit in an abandoned state possibly forever. That's all I can think of. It could become an eyesore if it sits there a while.
Yep.
And if the state had the ability at the time to purchase it, it probably is worth giving the state the chance to do that.
I know in one of the discussions that we had, it was said in such a way that the state would want to retain this asset back to protect the community from somebody else coming in and buying it that probably didn't have the same visions of all parties that are involved right now. And I think that's just a great thing to be sure of.
So we're agreeing that is a good thing to add, a right of first refusal in terms of protecting the.
Yeah, so do you have 3 changes? That's what I had in my head.
That I'm gonna be making to your language. Okay, so I think this is what I'm going to do. I'll try and do it very quickly to come back. So on page 1, line 11, request for proposals related to the purchase or lease of the airport prior to the issuance of any RFP. So that it's clear that the town has given the opportunity to comment in advance. Adding in subsection C, it currently has 4 subdivisions listed. A 5th subdivision would be included if the airport is conveyed through a purchase and sale agreement. The right of first refusal for the state to repurchase the airport. And then your 3rd change is going to be in subsection D, starting on line 11 on page 2, splitting it to be 2 subdivisions. So it's a subsection D. The agency shall not proceed with the sale or lease of the airport unless 1, there is a fair market, et cetera. And then at the end of line 13, putting a semicolon and then a new subdivision 2, the town of Linden is given the opportunity to review and comment on the final purchase and sale agreement or lease as applicable. One question.
In the sunset.
Oh, yes, on the sunset, thank you. And then the entire thing is going to sunset on 7/1/26. 6/1/26, 5/1/26.
5/1.
5/1.
5.
Wouldn't still be here.
Oh,
I
I know.
oh my gosh. Oh,
Okay, so that will be done in the effective dates. And then a final question for you. House transportation, just on the off chance that they love all of the changes that you're making. They didn't love in the beginning of subdivision 4 that the word ensure was used because it's something that is at the determination of the Secretary of Transportation at the federal level as to who was included, what airports are included in the NPIAS. There was a suggestion to use endeavor instead of ensure. Would you like to change it to endeavor?
because insure doesn't mean we can't insure.
Yes, and I continue to say that it is not an unqualified insurer because it has at the end subject to federal determination,
Right.
and that there very well could be things that are included in whatever the conveyance documents are that, you know, is as strong as possible with the, that's having the final permission. But I think you could do endeavor or say, like as practicable, the airport continues to be identified.
Yeah.
I'm not against any of that. My question, let's say this goes through and we sell it to a company that rhymes with Ada. And then 10, 20 years from now, Elon Musk or somebody else wants to buy it. And the state at that time says, you know what, our right of first refusal, we don't want to buy it. And so then it gets sold. Do any of these conditions and these endeavors, will they persist with the property regardless of who, if it's resold to another private entity?
Well, this is
Is that how-
time,
Depends on the purpose.
it depends. This one is time limited, but the others are in perpetuity, like the public use.
Yeah, so that one says in perpetuity, and it says it in here. Other ones talk about like honored for the balance of the lease term, and that's just this specific conveyance. I know your example is further into the future. I do not know enough about the airport and what kind of easements or servitudes or anything there is that would be part of the warranty deed that exists currently, or that would be part of whatever the conveyance would be. So I can't speak to that. I don't know if Michelle can, and I don't know if it's something that would be incorporated into what is in the warranty deed when this conveyance happens. Another thing to just remember in the back of your head, and Michelle talks about this upstairs, so I'm gonna, you know, basically parrot what she said, is Act 250 is gonna carry, is gonna control, stay with it, and local zoning is gonna be there. So there is not a, just because the state doesn't pick it up at the next opportunity, that the state has, you know, some say in what happens there through other regulatory processes.
And I get that. My concern is if an entity or organization, be it the first purchase or the second or third, lets it go foul, runs into financial ruin, and then it just sits in this probate or escrow type of uncertainty limbo for years on end, where the state's just trying to get it to be a functional airport again, but the private interests are preventing because it's on the courts. That's where I keep coming back to a 99-year lease. It's just very attractive to me to maintain all the state's interests, but Ryan, you guys figure it out. I trust you all.
Do you want me to go make those changes?
Sure.
Is it, the ensure or endeavor or try, whatever word we want to have to, just the,
Well, you can
Very
add as
fair.
practicable.
yeah, I just didn't know if the secretary, like,
No, I feel like that's a bit out of our hands, as Cynthia noted. You know, I think ensure is fine. I felt that the argument she made for ensure upstairs was pretty strong. And I have requested from staff, you know, what are the practicalities in terms of a private entity meeting the NAPIS standard to be able to remain in the system. So doing a little research on that. Chris Roop did identify that should an airport be in the NAPIS, was it in the NAPIS system or was it be a receiving airport? I can't remember.
Oh, a reliever airport.
Reliever.
I think he said if it was in the NPIS.
Yeah, so if it's in the NAPIS, then under certain conditions, that private entity could be eligible for FAA funding, but it's prioritized obviously amongst other state investments. And Senator Kitchen, when I first came in, you asked about the 150,000 that the state receives per airport.
And is that from the FAA?
So that safety money that we receive annually to invest in for each state airport is a state-only
Okay.
receipt of
It wouldn't,
resources. And it's per airport, so it wouldn't continue to flow to us and it wouldn't flow to a private sector entity.
Okay, and that's from the FAA?
but it might if we still lease it to them.
My understanding of a lease situation was that similar to what we do with the railroads, that we would be eligible to apply for federal funding to assist the private entity leasing our property to make investments. But that would be competing against our other airports.
And
Do you have more changes for me, just because I have another commitment at 11, so I was gonna.
Go run to do this.
I'll go run and do this, and you can keep talking about things, and then tell me if there are additions when I get back.
And just talking about that lease and talking with the town is that they're as excited about putting this property on the grand list as much as anything. And so, and I know there's provisions that you can put in a lease to collect those types of monies as if it was a full ownership, but to get it back on the grand list and to be able to get that on the, paying taxes was exciting to them. But I do favor of the lease ideas, as I brought up, I really do, and, but I also see the town's position of, I know that we, in one of my former roles as a select board chair, we took a gravel pit that was paying $2,500 a year taxes, and we allowed a paving company to go in there. And that went from $2,500 a year to $86,000 a year, to where we actually were able to reduce the town's tax rate to their citizens for allowing that to be there. So that is, something that, draws my attention to a purchase versus a lease.
Okay, we're coming.
Well, I guess we're waiting for Anthea
Okay.
to make the changes.
I just hope that in this conversation, it's not coming across like we want to start unloading all of our airports. This is kind of a unique circumstance. We want to hold on to a few of them, right?
Well, along those happening out there, if there's money to be made in the future for others, we'll certainly entertain them for whoever's here.
Like the John Boylan Airport, that was authorized to be sold, but didn't happen.
Yeah. That was so much more contentious than this. I mean, the communities were fighting, the people, I mean, at the end of the day, it almost seemed like there wasn't a win-win on that. And there
Sometimes
was
they're
a,
not a win-win.
no, exactly. And this one right here, as the way it's going down the road, it just seems like, you know, everybody's nodding their head in the right direction. And cautiously optimistic, I think is the term. So. Guys, we're gonna continue on and probably try to change this so we can vote it out. It's up to you guys to whether you guys want to stay around.
We're off to the house now, so we got 15 minutes, I think, maybe half an hour, and we gotta testify over there, so we gotta get moving anyway.
Okay,
Well, what we can do is get a copy of our amendment as soon as we get it, so that you have it.
send it to you guys to take a peek at it.
We would appreciate that.
Appreciate you guys.
All right, thank you again. We really cannot say enough about how much we appreciate the fact that you've included us in this from the get-go and allowed us to present our thoughts and ideas on this too. We really, really do appreciate
We
that.
appreciate your involvement also, because if this is gonna work, we need cooperation from everyone, and we don't want to do something that we're gonna be sorry for. So it's always good to have the towns or municipalities involved in the decision making. So, in the future, it works well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
right,
Okay,
thank
thank
you.
you.
You want to chat about the T-bill and sections?
Yeah, I want to do that with,
I do want to make a comment. I don't know whether people are listening, but last time we discussed it, there was concern on the part of the town of Newbury that they are very, very opposed to the state citing a juvenile treatment facility in their property. And it's privately owned by Beckett. And so they're feeling that the approach toward the sale of this property and the way that it's the relationship with the town is very different and much more cordial than they've experienced. Now, their case has appeal is at the Vermont Supreme Court, and it involves a state statute around the citing of certain facilities. But I do want to raise it, that has been a concern that somehow there's a different standard and different treatment. I did talk to the governor this morning about, the proposal that's under appeal. They feel very strongly that that is a statute that they are going to pursue and defend. But from the perspective of a town, they're feeling that the way in which the legislature has responded here on the sale of estate property is very different, and they have found that difference in terms of moving forward with something that the town does not want and has taken an official opinion that they don't want is very different than the way in which this committee has approached the town of Linden with this sale of the property, maybe even with the sale of the property in Burlington. These are state-owned assets. This involves an appeal around privately owned property. I just am making the statement. I'm not, I don't expect, but I do want to acknowledge that there is a concern about the disparate treatment and the deference being paid to towns. The situation does involve different in the sense that it's privately owned, and it also involves state law around.
We're approached, we're just responding. Yes.
And I appreciate that, and I think that's one of the big things that's different here as well. And I actually last year spoke to our chair of institutions at that time about how much he wanted to get involved with it because it was in litigation. And I was so afraid that we were going to take a position contrary to what both sides were, and that I was so afraid that we were going to say something that we weren't supposed to say. And so I have shied away from a lot of my comments that I could have on that because it is in litigation, and I don't want to stick my neck out there and be saying stuff that I just shouldn't be saying, and give people hope of one way or the other. And so it is a different situation.
This is a different situation.
It's just totally different. And I do understand where Newbury's coming from. I wish that I would have been at that meeting with you the other day. I apologize to you for not being there, but you know why I wasn't. But I wish I could have been there and had to comment on that.
At least, my understanding here is that there's no dispute over use of the property. It's consistent with their zoning, it's continuing as an airport, it's just a matter of ownership. But I simply want to state that there is perceived, and I would hate to use the word perceived because I've been criticized for using the word perceived. There is a feeling that different towns are responded to differently. And you know, because you listened to, you were there, I was not there last year for institutions where you obviously heard very directly from the towns. There have been efforts to modify the statute and meetings, and I talked with the governor just this morning. And it's not something, I think that there is a desire that the legislature would intervene and move away from that proposal in the town of Newbury. And I do not get that. While there's litigation, everything that I have been given for comments back is that needs to be respected and let the Supreme Court review the dispute and make a decision. But I do feel, as someone who represents the town of Newbury, that they feel very strongly that different towns are being responded to differently by this body.
That's their opinion. That's fine. I don't
So
think that's true.
I'm just going on record, but I did talk to the governor directly this morning. Once again, in light of the situation that came up in the legislative breakfast in St. Johnsbury at that point. And I think that this is an issue where there are three branches of government. And I've talked in the past to the oversight committees, and their view is that in this, that they are not intervening in this matter.
Well, they're gonna have their day in court, it's in court now.
Well, that's true, but the expectation is that legislators could make this go away, and it could go away if you removed funding. So I'm simply conveying the strong feelings, and
Okay,
that's at this point all that I can state.
Michelle, what is our future about reporting sections? Is that going to be drafted up in shorter form or something? I know I asked the overall. How's that going?
The rest of the sections for other folks, Anthea is preparing. I have an update in my bag for you based on the numbers that came out of the appropriations.
Are we adjourned, or we're still
We're
working?
still like,
So, yes, we're making headway. Is it tomorrow that you're having a second reading?
I don't know what the
Don't know yet.
appropriations, what they're doing.
Did you pass the TO out yesterday?
Unanimous.
So that means it would be ready this week to tomorrow, but we could pass over it if we're not ready.
Be unnoticed today.
Be on notice today.
You passed it out with no fees? All right, great job.
That's true, there is no fees in the transportation.
Were you having it separate?
It's in the budget, because we had to appropriate,
So you
the money.
spent the 21 million on this?
No, you only had 8 this year.
Right, so I have to-
Yeah, but
No fees will be started at the beginning of the
Oh, yeah,
fiscal year, you can say that.
$21 million in fees, wow.
well, I'll
We're
get
the
up
highest-
and
We're the highest in the surrounding states as we are right today.
Well, I think you're gonna have a chance to say yes or no to it if it gets split out, like we've talked about,
you will.
so.
But the other thing is, then if you don't want to do it, we'll go back in and revise the plan to make the plan conform with the available funding. And the other part is we would need, notwithstanding, because there's a statutory requirement for that 3-year update, which we have basically not complied with or formally recognized. So that's gonna be ultimately. depending on
Ultimately, it
how-
sounds like no matter how it goes, that it's going to, we're either gonna get back to statute or we're either gonna get it approved in this manner.
That's because the statute is very clear. It's every 3 years. And I researched the statute. So I realized that that's, and the problem, of course, is, as this committee has talked about in the past, the more you extend that period of time, when you do an increase, then it becomes even more magnified. So that's the dilemma. But if we don't do it this year, then you're going to have a problem with your structural deficit out into the future, because the revenues can't support even the draw. We have protected, but that has been adjusted for the available revenues, so that there would be some available for the IIJA match. So that 25 million wouldn't be sufficient to draw down all of the federal dollars. So that's just the fiscal implications that would be attendant to that vote. And that's the intersection between, the plan and the budget. The House put nothing in for the match. There's nothing.
Yeah.
What do we have for the, what do we have in there? 25 million for the match?
25 million.
Just
So
send us
what do we
a-
need, 59
Yes.
She did not change insured.
for all of that? Was it 59 million that we did?
Remember off the top of my head, Chris Root had it. It was 10 million of one-time money set aside for 3 years to fund the draw for the federal highway aid, which is the normal budget. And then
I didn't change.
you don't want to Deborah, do it.
Perfect, because the copier
I
upstairs.
thought it sure.
What?
I thought it sure.
Well, I think you added as soon as practicable,
Oh,
did
you
you?
wanted me to put it?
No, did we do that?
I didn't put a.
No,
copier.
I
We
thought
put as,
Sure.
Yeah, we just
So-
decided that the conditioning was the federal,
Okay.
so it seemed like a unnecessary obsession.
You're making a lot of other changes that they're.
I will ensure that it's sunny tomorrow unless it's not,
Unless the weatherman's,
unless there's clouds.
unless.
The weather person.
What is the federal weather agency?
You know what?
NOAA. Yeah, you will insure it unless NOAA doesn't approve it, right? Or something like that?
Just if the clouds don't approve.
Yes, I'm posting right now. I'm gonna run the copies first.
Okay.
Has my name first, does that mean I have to present this thing?
Well, it's a budget.
It's alphabetical, I can change it.
You change his last name?
It's not my district and I've had a bad experience with
I can change the order, I can't change.
I'll, I don't have a
I
problem.
could change his last name.
Jade's report this,
No, I think Russ,
Yeah, it's just-
it's his district.
And then we're in real estate a little bit, so I'm not opposed at all to reporting that.
So do you want me to do Ingalls and then alphabetical?
I did.
Yeah.
I just didn't know the first name is who has to do it.
I think the Senate Secretary will like it if the reporter is the.
Whatever, well.
You
I'm
wanna
not one
keep-
to shy away from the spotlight, so I won't touch this
As long
one.
as he doesn't get the commission.
I'm a little sore over that.
And just to be clear, even if you don't make any changes, I'm gonna need to change, or I will change the ordering of the names, and this needs to get edited before it gets submitted to calendar, but I will get it to them as soon as I am out of this committee.
And you have to go to your other committee in 3 minutes.
To the house. Well, we could just look it over when we get it.
Sure.
Tell it,
Do you wanna do that, and then if it changes?
if there are changes, we'll let you know.
Oh,
That was amazingly fast, thank you, I was getting into quite
Yes.
the copier upstairs. Okay, so let me know if you want any further changes made to that.
So we can vote this out.
Oh,
We can vote this out if we want to now, with what you want to do later.
and just let me know if there need to be any further changes. If you don't tell me to make any further changes, what I will do is, I will swap the first name in terms of who is listed, and then I will get it edited, strip out the highlighting, and then I will send it to you, Senator Ingles, to get to the Senate Secretary's office. If you want to see further changes, just let me know what they are.
Looks like they're all here. May 1, Senator Persley.
Yes, I won that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was key.
Oh, yeah, okay, yeah, thank you, okay.
Will House Transportation have this, or I guess we'll wait till we pass it? They have it now, so they can talk about it, because they're meeting right now.
I have to go there now, so.
All right.
I'll see you all, thank you.
Oh, you're going to,
And we don't need to vote, I don't think, because it's an amendment
full committee?
from all.
Ready to vote there?
I thought we did, but if you don't want to.
I don't think we have to. It's not a committee action because we don't have possession of the
Since
bill.
everybody's on.
It's
that's
all on,
what- I asked this question in appropriations. I said, why do we have to vote? Since we're all on it.
and we were told.
You wouldn't have your name on it.
Okay,
if
so
you're-
that's the latest and newest, right? We have it right there.
And Senator Ingalls is the reporter.
Okay,
His name will go first and he'll take it out
okay, that will be amendment to the.
T-bill.
T-bill.
to the T-bill.
You want to just vote, just in case?
Okay.
You want to do that? You want to
Let's
just vote
do
on
it,
it?
that way we're safe.
Yeah, that way we don't have to say that we could have.
Karen, that we're all sponsors is that we
Sure.
agree.
Aye.
Aye.
Marcus Alden.
Unanimous vote.
So we had a first and we had a second, and then we are all ayes.
I don't think we even need seconds.
No.
Okay, so boom,
Are we,
Oh.
finished our business
Oh.
here today?
Yeah, we'll
five,
just wait for the
zero.
reporting section.
Zero.
I assume you don't want to report any sections of the bill, because you're doing other big bills soon.
I think I'm doing the budget myself.
Yeah, so I heard.
Okay, so the reporter, so Senator Mazza, do you sign this? And then,
No, you are. the
okay, so I
reporter.
sign it and take it up, right?
Once you get the edited copy
Okay,
from it.
Well, that gets
so we're
your
gonna wait
name.
for that, okay.
So just tell Anthea no changes so that she could send it to editing and then,
So if we get our sections,
Your name on it.
we're ready to go probably this week.
well, we have the sections, the question on who's gonna report which section.
Well, I thought there was a revised section reporting that I think it's working on. No?
No, she sent it to us,
Oh.
but the question is who's gonna,
No?
There's 37 sections, and so in years past, we would chunk off.
Yeah, I don't know if I've seen
just wanna
that.
know what y'all want me to speak, so we,
Yeah, is
Last
that,
year I
is that what
tried-
it is right there?
Last year I turned it over to Senator Berkeley, he was the first.
yeah, I did section 2 in the past, like that.
So everybody got one of, we should probably get one of these before we're all said and done.
Is that what we're using?
I don't know,
I don't think.
That's what Anthea.
No.
Do you have a section by section for the T-bill available that you can print 4 more
I
copies?
heard they were, well, I just heard they were finalizing the section by section.
No, this is the final, Anthea said there was one tiny,
Okay.
Michelle, I believe, has written you your opening.
Yeah, I got that right.
Okay, so
I got that right here, and then I yield to Senator Berkeley, that's what it was, but.
He does the rest of it?
you want to do the rest? You stick those, I'll be right back.
yeah. Well, you remember before we started,
4 color copies would be great.
you remember before we started, she said she was just gonna print it off.
She didn't say she was gonna print it. I don't know if you wanna wait
It
for,
could be after print.
I don't think she sent it.
Okay.
I
Well, we're not
You
gonna
could
do it
ask her.
today, we'll get a copy before tomorrow, we'll go over it, make sure that it's not too lengthy, we don't want, you know.
No, it's all, they're just little
I know
abbreviations.
before, we used to have the abbreviated copy, and then if you wanted to expand more, you have them both.
Exactly
So you
what
can look at both of the sheets and decide how
I
you
think
want
that's
to
what
do
she
it.
has those, and then if you flip back, she has like a table.
Oh, here we go, maybe.
Where you can just.
Yeah, here we go.
Yeah, that kind of thing. And then,
Whatever you're comfortable with, I want to make sure you're comfortable with it.
which is who's gonna take which section.
Yeah. So decide that first thing in the morning, go on to that, okay?
People can look at it and see what sections.
Are there